Good morning. We are reading The Wheel on the School by Maynard de Jong, pictures by Maurice Sendak. We are on chapter 4, which is called Yella and the Farmer. They had stumbled through arithmetic. They had been stupid about grammar. But when it came to penmanship, well, there was just no way to keep their minds on penmanship. Lena was the first one to give up in despair. The teacher, walking along the aisle, had stopped to study her copybook. Lena promptly gave up. "Teacher," she said, "I can't sit still, and when you can't sit still, you can't do penmanship. It's all jiggly." The whole class stopped. "Let's make plans," Alka suggested hopefully. "We ought to make plans about how we're going to get a wheel for those two storks." "The storks will be coming awfully soon, won't they?" Elke asked the teacher. "Well, the stork season is here. There's no evading that," the teacher said slowly. "And since you've brought it up so shrewdly, Elke, I can't deny that we haven't much time." "Then why are we wasting it on penmanship?" Yella said. He held up his copybook for the teacher and all to see. He had done about 3 words of penmanship, but then he'd given up and drawn a picture of a big stork with a big fish held crosswise in its bill. "That fish is a pickerel out of our own moat," Yella explained. The teacher laughed. "You're not only thinking way ahead, you're drawing way ahead, Yella, and it isn't penmanship. But if you're all going to write in your own copybooks like quavery old men, Grandmother Sybil III could write a steadier hand than you, Lena." "Well," the teacher paused. The whole class waited expectantly. "Now listen, boys and Lena. Yesterday we lost an hour. And if I dismiss school again a whole hour early, how much does it mean to you? Would you be willing to come to school after this is all over, a whole free Saturday afternoon to make up for this lost time?" "Oh, yes," they all said together. "Oh, sure." "Then it's agreed," the teacher said promptly. "Now we've an hour before noon. Suppose we spend that hour looking through Shora. In the afternoon, we'll branch out over the countryside. We'll go to every farm, down every road." "Oh boy," Alka said, "if we each found a wheel, we'd have a wheel for almost every house in Shora." "We've got to find one for Grandmother Sybil's house, too," Lena reminded all of them. "Everybody but Legless Giannis," Yella immediately agreed. "All I'd give him is a rock in the head." "Not so fast. Not so fast," the teacher cautioned them. "Our whole problem is to find one wheel. Don't start rolling your wheels to the school and up on every roof of Shora. Just find one. I'm afraid that'll be difficult enough. And remember, when the clock in the tower strikes 12, all report back to school. If we haven't found a wheel, I'll assign each one a road to search this afternoon." They streamed out of the school. It was exciting to rush out of school and down the village street, to scatter and branch out in a search of every yard and barn and shed. They were tremendously hopeful at first, but the short last hour of Saturday morning rushed on. And now it hadn't seemed like an hour at all, hardly 10 minutes, when the big clock in the tower was banging out the hour of 12. It bonged 12 slow times. All over the village, every school child was counting the strokes. It was hard to believe the clock, but 12 o'clock it was. The clock had counted right. In the attic, excuse me. In the attic of his own house, Yella counted the bongs of the clock. He looked disgustedly through the little dusty attic window up at the great white face of the clock. It was 12. The big bronze hands said so, too. And here he sat empty-handed in the attic of his own house. He was muddy and wet. He'd been across back lots and over ditches, but had ended up empty-handed in his own dusty, dry attic. It had seemed silly to think that there'd be a wagon wheel up in the attic, but the teacher had said to look where a wheel could be and where it couldn't possibly be. Well, a wheel couldn't possibly be in an attic, and it wasn't. Yella had found a bow. In his own attic, he'd found a bow that he'd never known about, but no arrows. Now he sat behind the dusty window and twanged the empty bow at the offending round white face of the clock in the tower. Yella glanced down from his high window into the backyard of Grandmother Sybil's house next door. The cellar trap door flew open, and there came Alka struggling up out of the cellar with a big stone crock. Alka set down the crock and stared up at the clock in the tower. Alka felt cheated and disappointed. He'd been through every shed in Shora, except the shed of legless Giannis, of course. You didn't just go up to Giannis and say, "May I look through your shed?" You'd get your head knocked off. Grandmother Sybil's house had been his last house. It had no shed. Alka had been desperate enough to ask Grandmother Sybil if he might look through her cellar. "It's no use, Alka," Grandmother Sybil had said. "I know exactly what's in my old cellar. 1 crock of sauerkraut. I don't keep things down cellar anymore. It's too difficult for me to get down there. But I can't stand the smell of sauerkraut, so there it is." "The teacher told us," Alka said doubtfully, "to look where a wheel could be and where it couldn't possibly be." "Well, you've come to the right place," Grandmother said with a chuckle. "A wheel couldn't possibly be in my cellar. But your teacher is right. That's the only way to find things. So go ahead and look, else you won't feel satisfied. And while you're there, will you carry the sauerkraut out into the backyard for me? It's even beginning to smell through the floor." Now, as he stood staring up at the tower clock with the crock at his feet, Alka's eyes suddenly caught a movement behind the high attic window next door. Yella was aiming an arrowless bow at him. "Look what I've found!" Yella shouted through the window. "That's not a wagon wheel," Alka yelled back. "No, but boy, could you have fun with it if you had some arrows. What did you find?" "A crock of sauerkraut," Alka yelled back, and suddenly he grinned. Yella made a face. "What good is sauerkraut for storks?" Alka shrugged. "About as much good as a bow, I guess. Come on, let's get back to school. It's 12. In a barn at the edge of the village, Pierre and Dirk heard the clock in the tower bong out the hour. It stopped them cold. They sat looking at each other guiltily. 12 o'clock, Dirk told Pierre, "and you and I just played." "Yeah, I know," Pierre said. They had found a haymow in the barn. They had climbed to the top of the haymow. Of course there had been no wagon wheel on top of the hay. They hadn't expected one. But as Pierre had told Dirk virtuously, they were supposed to look where a wheel couldn't possibly be. Of course, having climbed to the top of the haymow, they'd had to slide down to the barn floor. That had been such fun they'd climbed right back, not even pretending to look for a wagon wheel now. It was amazing how fast an hour of fun had flown by. Now it was 12. Pierre looked at Dirk. Dirk looked at Pierre. They sat in the hay that had slid down to the barn floor with them. Dirk looked at the sprawled hay and hastily jumped up. "We haven't got a wagon wheel," he said woefully. "All we've got is a mess." "Not even a spoke," Pierre said dolefully. "Maybe we'd better grab up the hay and take it along," Dirk suggested. "Hay for a stork? It isn't a goat." "No, but we haven't time to put it back on top of the mow. If we take it along and drop it somewhere, the farmer won't know we played in his hay." It seemed a good idea. At least it was about the best thing to do under the circumstances. They hastily scraped the sprawled hay together. Each grabbed up an armful and started running toward school. "Boy, that was fun," Pierce said, "wasn't it?" "Yes," Dirk said guiltily, "but I hope somebody found a wheel." "Couldn't we take the hay to school and say it's for the storks to build a nest with?" Pierce suggested. "That would show we did something." "Maybe," Dirk said doubtfully, "but come on, run. It's way past 12. When Dirk and Pierre came running toward the schoolyard, Yella and Alka were already there with the teacher. Far behind Pierre and Dirk came Ailka pushing a high old baby carriage. A distance behind Ailka, toward the canal end of the street, Lena came running, empty-handed. When they were all gathered in the schoolyard, the teacher looked at each one of them in turn. A bow, a baby carriage, 2 bundles of hay, but no wagon wheel, the teacher said slowly. He looked at Alka. "And what did you find, Alka?" "A crock of sauerkraut," Alka said somberly, "but I didn't bring it here. I didn't think it would be any use to storks." "I didn't find anything at all," Lena said hastily. The teacher looked at the bundles of hay. "Why did you bring hay?" he asked Pierre. "We thought if somebody had found a wheel..." Pierre said vaguely. The hay might help the storks to start a nest. Dirk nodded. Yes, that's what we thought, he said hastily. And you brought a baby carriage, Elke. Why? I brought it for the wheels, Elke said. I suppose I didn't really think they were big enough. I guess they were just the nearest thing to a wagon wheel that I could find. My mother let me have it, he explained. She said since I was her last baby, definitely, and me going on 12. Some baby, Yellow said. Huh? Then we've got nothing, Lena said softly. They stood in an unhappy little circle in the schoolyard. They were so disappointed they did not look at each other. Somehow they all seemed to stare at the silly baby carriage. Pierre and Dirk stood there with their foolish armloads of hay. Pierre suddenly stepped up and shoved his hay into Elke's baby carriage. In obvious relief, Dirk shoved his armload on top of Pierre's. There stood the baby carriage with hay sticking out of it in every direction. Then nobody was looking at the baby carriage. All eyes turned up. Here's a picture of the kids in their circle with nothing. There above the dike, high in the sky, high, white, huge wings flapping, two storks appeared from over the sea. Over the tower, the storks winged still higher, flew high, flew straight, didn't dip down for shore, did not even pause or circle. Then there were two white winging dots disappearing fast in the enormous blue sky. Soon they were gone. Slowly all the eyes came down again. All were staring at the baby carriage again. Elke's face became red. He muttered something that nobody understood, grabbed the baby carriage and shoved it disgustingly into the far corner of the schoolyard. Now, if we only had a goat, Elke said, looking at a tuft of hay that had spilled out of the baby carriage and over his wooden shoes. No one laughed, and Elke wasn't smiling. No one said a thing. They were so quiet they could hear Lena swallowing hard a couple of times. That was the trouble with being a girl, Lena thought. You wanted to cry at things like this. But boys just looked angry and stubborn and disgusted. Suddenly, Lena didn't swallow anymore, didn't want to cry anymore. She was angry. Yella said it for them all. Look, he savagely told them all, we can't mess around with bows and baby carriages and play in hay and fool around anymore. He took his bow and slung it hard toward the corner with the baby carriage. It somehow caught in the hay sticking out of the baby carriage, but Yella did not bother to notice. Look, he said, with the storks here, we've got to hunt for just one wheel, and we've got to hunt hard. Yella was angry with himself and everybody else. Yella's right, the teacher said, and I'm glad you all realize it now. However, we didn't really expect to find a wheel in Shora. Those are only the first two storks we have seen, so we shouldn't get too disappointed. Nevertheless, from now on, the storks will be coming by twos, and then they'll be winging over Shora in flocks. And there's so little we can do to attract a couple of them to Shora. All we can do is put up a wheel. The rest is up to the storks. But that little we should do promptly. After that we can play. We'll really hunt, they solemnly promised. Fine. Then we'll start in again right after lunch. There are 5 roads spreading out from Shora. You boys will each take a road. Lena will take the dike. The dike? Lena said. Yes, I know. There isn't much chance of a wagon wheels being on the dike. But from the dike, you can see all the little side roads and lanes and the isolated farmhouses that lie between the roads that the boys are taking. You can cover those while the boys search every house and barn along their roads. How far do we go? Elke asked. As far as it takes to find a wheel, Yella answered him before the teacher could say anything. I'll be in the school all afternoon and into the evening if that's necessary, the teacher said. So be sure to report to me when you finish your search. If somebody finds a wheel, I'll ring the school bell. When you hear it, come back to school. Now, everybody home for lunch. But don't forget, I still say look everywhere where a wheel could be and where it couldn't possibly be. In spite of your disappointment. In Shora this morning, the unexpected still always comes up to surprise us. It sounded hopeful again. And no more storks had appeared from over the sea. They all broke away and ran home as hard as they could.